Welcome to Season 2 with the Market Mystics, where we discuss and redefine markets, wealth, and trading on Earth as it is in heaven. Join us on the journey while we consider new possibilities with special guests who might just challenge a few perspectives. Get ready to dive in deep with your hosts, Joshua and Kim.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Monday.
We made it.
We did make it. I'm excited to record today after last week's episodes with Dr. Farney, because I feel like we dove pretty deep into a lot of things. And to be honest, I can't really remember what we recorded and what we didn't with him because there was conversation all around everything that was recorded.
Right. Yeah, it was that. Sometimes that's a little bit tricky because there was lots of talk before, in the middle, after, but it was all really good. And what was recorded and posted was excellent. So I'm just really grateful to have him back on the show.
Heck yeah, me too. Do you want to introduce what we want to talk about today?
Sure. So I was looking through some of the notes that I took from our conversation with him, and one of the things that jumped out at me was the comment, when you're in resonance with God, you don't need to be in control. And immediately that clicked into my mind. In Kim and I, for a while, have been talking to each other, been talking on the show about just this like state of flow that you find. And I think we talked about it with Dr. Farney as well, where it's just like things are moving for you. And it clicked somewhere in my mind, like that state of flow that we've experienced and talked about is similar to what he was talking about in that, where it's just like when you're vibrating at the same frequency, when you're flowing with God, whatever terminology you want to put on it, when you're in deep, intimate relationship, like this need that sometimes we feel of being in control of things drifts away, because you start to just see like, oh, well, this worked, and you move over here, and oh, this worked, and like you're just moving with God rather than trying to control an outcome, and things are working out so much better than you could have hoped. That like, yeah, I think that like fear, like control tends to be a fear-based response. And I think that sort of falls away when you're starting to see these outcomes just flowing.
Mm-hmm. I tend to agree. I did a video last week because it was like midweek, and so many topics that came up, even in the private conversation that we had, like the off-air conversation we had with Dr. Farney. It was coming up in like other parts of my life. People who are completely unconnected don't listen to this show, and even had they listened to it, they wouldn't have heard it. But similar conversations from all these different directions, and it was so in my face. Like, I suppose I was in the tidal wave of the flow, because it was just like hardcore flowing, and it was from every direction. But I think sometimes it can be more subtle as well. I've just been feeling it a lot recently. And it's not that it's not there all the time. But I also think sometimes, even when there's flow, I still have something in me that thinks I need control, which is why this is an important conversation. And so I wind up like trying to go against the current. And then I still get where the flow is taking me. It just comes with a whole lot more work, as opposed to me just like saying, all right, I'm riding this wave.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that comes, the more you're in that, I think the easier it is to stay in that. It's to use the like riding the wave, like the first time you go and you surf, like learning to catch the wave, learning to be on the wave, like kind of like it's a process.
Mhm.
But the more you do it, the more it becomes natural to like feel the wave building, to catch the wave and to ride the wave. And it isn't even that you give up all control, because you can move around, but the wave is pushing you a general direction.
Right.
And I tend to think that that's kind of how relationship with God is. Like he's like, "Hey, we're going this way. Now if you want to move right and left and do this and that on the way there, great. That's totally up to you. But this is the direction we're going."
Mhm.
And it's faster. Everything just works better when you're doing that. And yeah, I just think that it is kind of that relationship. It is kind of that experience of like the more you do it, the better this is.
I would agree. Um, I when we were pressing in or seeking the Lord about this conversation before we hit record,
Hmm.
um, he was just showing me, even with the conversation we had right before this, we were talking about, I had a friend who we wound up talking this weekend about microdosing with mushrooms and is it DMT?
Yeah.
I can't remember yeah, okay, DMT, which I knew nothing about. I'm just like, I mean, tell me about it. I don't even know really the premise. And then Josh and I were talking about it because he also has a perspective and information and stuff about it's just information, it's knowledge, right?
Hmm.
Um, so for the record, I was not like, I'm not inquiring because I'm wanting to do this. I just want to know, like, what is the draw? What is it that people are actually seeking? What is actually happening? What
Hmm.
happens in the brain with it? Like I'm a little bit nerdy that way. Like I like to know how things work. Anyway, so we were talking about it. And as we were talking about it, I just got this little nudge from the Lord. And he essentially said to me, he's like, why are you seeking knowledge on something that you already can experience without having to have outside influence? So essentially, like, he's saying some of the things that happen during those experiences with the microdosing or whatever, like you're able to produce yourself if you get into this intimate place with him. And this is what he was telling me. Okay, you can check your sources, check facts, whatever. But why are you looking at ways to manufacture it on your own accord
Hmm.
and from somewhere outside of me? And I'm bringing this up in this conversation because if we go back to this quote that you said in the beginning, when you're in resonance with God, you don't need to be in control. And
Hmm.
I was just really reminded as I was pressing in with him, he was like, this is exactly this conversation we just had.
Hmm.
If you're in resonance with me, then why would you try to still like put in some control over when and how you experience me
Right.
or things of me or things I want to show you? Why are you manufacturing it when you're already there?
Hmm.
Which is a wild thing to me. And I mean, I think about even stories in scripture and how even the Israelites, they would continually go back and like make idols, right? Or like other gods. And it was like they're trying to manufacture some experience,
Hmm.
trying to use some of their own control to make it so that this can happen. And I think when we talk about the flow, this is the importance, right? Like this is that resonance. So when you're in resonance, not residence, when you're in resonance, you're resonating with God, with Yahweh, the
Hmm.
thing that you call him, then you don't have to go and try to manufacture it or make it happen or have some control over when and how and if. Um, though you can, because you
Mhm.
were even saying, Josh, that I don't remember what you said, like in meditation, a lot of the same brain activity happens as when you're doing this manufactured thing from when you're doing this just by focusing.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, when before you even brought that up, my mind went to that conversation we had, like, oh, this is similar. Like, it's even in that, like, taking a substance to try to recreate or just create an experience is that control. Um and like I said before, control generally is rooted in fear. Like, I think
Mm.
I know better when to have this experience, how long to have this experience, than trusting God to, um, to bring me an experience. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they were like, "Yeah, I was praying, and I just didn't really feel like, um, I just didn't really feel like God was showing me anything." And so I was just like, you know, I had the thought, well, I could get offended or not offended, but like I could like push in harder. But I also had the thought, well, what if I just don't need that conversation at the moment? And then it
Mhm.
was like, okay, well, like, let go of that, and 4 hours later and try again. And it was like a different experience. And it was like, it's that control of like, sometimes we think, okay, God, I need you right now to tell me what to do in this situation. And maybe he is saying, like, I want you to decide. Or maybe he's saying, just move with me, like, and instead of this precise thing. And so I think that's kind of what you were talking about. Like, sometimes it's like, man, do we want to manufacture relationship, or do we just want to be in relationship? And I think that that's, like, kind of at its core, that's what this whole thing is about. Like you said, I mean, resonance, not residence. And in my mind, I was like, man, it's kind of like if you're in residence with God, that's the same
Kind of the
thing as
same.
being in resonance with God. Like, and so my mind was kind of just like, yeah, like, that's, whether it's relationship with God, whether it's relationship with people, not forcing it, not manufacturing highs, is really the way I want to live it. Whether it's with my fiance, like, yeah, sometimes the highs are great, but like, if I'm constantly, every time I see her, trying to create, trying to manufacture this high experience, like, that's not just normal life. And I want to learn to live with her in just this normal life where we flow together. And that's ultimately how I want my relationship with God to be.
I think that's good. And I was thinking too, and I think you said it. I'm thinking about like what is flow? Like if we're talking
Mhm.
about this and I don't know, we have listeners who listen, I don't know, and they go, "Well, what the heck is flow?" Like we've
Yeah.
compared it to riding a wave or like a current in some water.
Mhm.
Um but when I was praying about it before we got on, uh I was just reminded that it's kind of the unification of a will. So it's kind of mutual submission, if I could say that. That's kind of a
Mhm.
dirty word in some Christian hurt groups. Uh, it just kind of is, right? Like
Mhm.
submission. But I think about getting into the flow with the Lord, and it is essentially the unification of my will and his will. And so there's not really any difference, and so you can just flow in it. You can float, you can be in that current, and it takes you where you need to go. And you don't have the resistance. And I also talked about like trying to swim against the current, and you have the ability to do that. But when you come into the unification of the wills, essentially, that's when things can start flowing. And it's almost I think sometimes it can be very unconscious, but I also think sometimes it can be very conscious. And I think this is when you start seeing those things that align and you're like, wow, this is coming from this direction and this is coming from this direction, but they're all going the same place and they're coming from everywhere, right? So you're having like the streams come in and unite. So I would say it's like the unification of wills, like between you and the Lord, but I also think there's something really beautiful, and this is what I've been seeing, and I think this is some of what you've been seeing, Josh, is when you start seeing other people who have gone into that unification of a will in one way or another, and then you see those other streams come in and align, right? So it is like almost a unification of the whole, or like this universal unification, and I think that's where it makes itself most obvious. Right. So when you're talking about something, I had a conversation with someone you don't even know, and the conversation goes in the same direction, the same things are said. It's hard to not pay attention to that and go, oh my gosh, something is in alignment here.
Right.
Right. And then I also tend to think there's this part of being even just unified in yourself that allows for flow.
Yes.
I've had a lot of experience in not being unified in myself, and essentially you're fighting yourself every step of the way. You know what I mean? And so it's bumpy and it's rocky and it just is like not fun. And it feels like roadblocks everywhere. But when you can kind of come into that unity within yourself, things do start to flow. And I think it opens you up to be able to flow with the Lord and to flow with the whole and all the things. So that's my big definition of flow.
I love it. I think it's great.
Okay, I have one more thing that I wrote down.
Okay.
From when I was pressing in, and I'm just gonna, I'll just say it. So let's go back to the quote. When you're in resonance with God, you don't need to be in control. I believe it's in Galatians is the fruit of the Spirit, like the list of the fruits of the Spirit. But the last one listed is self-control. So how do you think this lines up, or doesn't line up for that matter? I just kind of want to give the flip side of it.
Yeah. Immediately, without like processing it too much, my immediate reaction is it's two different types of control. The other thing is, and this is something your husband said to me once, or said to our group, that the fruits of the Spirit are fruits, not what was the other word he did? Not like dues or something like that. It wasn't something you could make yourself do to have this fruit. It was, this is a fruit of being in the Spirit. This is a fruit of being in that resonance with God. And I think that's the big difference is like, I think the control that we're talking about in like controlling your life is a fear-based control. And I think self-control as a fruit of the Spirit is a more like stewarding your life.
I like that.
And I think that that's just, it's a slightly different, slightly different way of approaching it. Because I do think like at some point, even as a Christian, God wants you to mature to where like you're making some decisions, you're doing some things, like you have some control. But I think if you're in that flow, the decisions you make are the decisions he would make because you want to stay in that flow. And versus like trying to control every outcome of your life because you're worried about what's going to happen. Like, I just think it's like using the same word. I think it's like a linguistic thing where it's like we're using the same word, but it really has a different heart.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I like how you differentiated but I had to bring it up. I had to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I think when we talk about this and not needing to be in control, at least for me, like the person who has read the Bible a couple times, I'm no expert, but that immediately came up, like, but we're supposed to be in control, but then we don't need to be in control. And it is different. I think you're exactly right. One is the outflow and one is like hindering the flow,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
Good stuff.
Definitely. Okay. Well, I think that's about it for today. Shall we wrap it up?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. We'll see you guys on Thursday.
See ya. Thank you for sticking around. Listen for new episodes every Monday and Thursday. Find us on all social media platforms by searching for Market Mystics. Don't forget to follow and subscribe. Visit upperroomcd.com where you can find more information about the hosts, projects, and guests. Go deeper by booking a coaching appointment focused on redefining identity and wealth in your life. See you next time.